we got a call from the Vatican. In his studies, he knew something about Messianic Jews, but never met any.
Okay.
And so here we are. He's now hearing 4 Jewish men share a testimony of how he came to Yeshua. And he said 2 things. He said, one, this can only mean one thing. Jesus is coming soon.
Wow.
That was his response to Jewish testimony of faith in Yeshua.
Wow.
This can only mean one thing. And he knew his Bible.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Covenant in Conflict podcast. It may have been a while since you've seen me here hosting the podcast that I think I actually helped create and then turned it over to Pastor David Blees, who's really been the host ever since. But I'm honored to host today with a very, very dear friend of mine, a mentor in my life, someone who my wife Tabitha and I really look to as even like a pastor, although he doesn't use that title, to us. And that is Rabbi Marty Waldman. It's great to have you today,
Hi,
Rabbi Marty, and good to be
Wonderful
with you. Yeah,
Wonderful to be here with you.
So there's so many things we could talk about. Rabbi Marty and I met probably over 10 years ago when I began to be a donor and then volunteer help towards a Jewish ministry called the Messianic Jewish Bible Institute. And then he kindly invited Tabitha and I to join the Messianic Jewish Synagogue in Dallas that he and his wife Marlene established. So we were members there for 3-ish years, I think, until the Lord led us to Gateway, where we founded the Center for Israel. And now here we are. And I'm, of course, been along with him on the journey of Towards Jerusalem Council II. And so I'm honored to serve on the legal board for Towards Jerusalem Council II. And we wanted to have a conversation today that's sort of a part 2 with a conversation that David and Rabbi Marty had recently. And they got into quite a few different things, but one of the more interesting pieces was the relationship between the Messianic Jewish community and the Catholic Church, and how that has been so instrumental in Towards Jerusalem Council's 2 vision for unity in the body of Messiah, or the body of Christ. So, Marty, where I'd love to start is just, you grew up Jewish, you became a believer, you're leading a Messianic Jewish synagogue. At what point do you begin realizing to have unity in the body between Jews and Gentiles, we have to engage with the largest stream of the Christian movement, which is the Catholic Church?
My first realization probably came about 30 years ago, actually when we started Towards Jerusalem Council II, and we're following that vision. One of not the original members, but one of the members of our leadership council was a Catholic priest. I didn't know where we were going with that because I was not necessarily a fan of the Catholic Church. I hardly knew anything about the Catholic Church. In fact, his name was Father Peter Hocken. He turned out to be a very good friend of mine in the end, and one of the nicest people that I've ever met. He was a scholar, Catholic scholar, but he and I spent hours and hours together in conversation about the Catholic Church because I needed to learn about the Catholic Church. And I would ask him the tough questions. I said, why do you worship Mary? And of course, he would explain it to me from a Catholic perspective. I'm not sure I bought it all, but I was appreciative of, gaining some understanding from a Catholic perspective. And so that was the beginning of my personal journey of accepting the Catholic Church. And this is interesting because I think if I were to just think about the Catholic Church or be presented about the Catholic Church as a whole, which is like almost 2 billion people, or maybe 2 billion, that's a lot of people. And I would have thought, what do I need that for? That's just taking my time up, and I've got so many other things to do. But it's because I got to know one man in the Catholic Church on a personal, and intimately friendly basis, that I started to really learn. And I realized that if we're going to ever have unity in the body of Messiah, especially between Christians and Messianic Jews, then we have to deal with the church. Forgive me for using this language, but we have to deal with the church that perpetrated, the most evil against the Jewish community,
Yeah.
Or the Messianic Jews in particular, which was the Catholic Church. And Father Peter eventually was given permission by the Vatican at the time to stand up and confess that sin in public.
Wow.
I know you know this because of your own background, but most people don't realize that the Catholic Church does not, quote unquote, sin.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to stand up on behalf of the Vatican and say that we sinned against the Jewish people and against the Messianic Jewish community, that was huge. It was huge. And not even many people have seen the video that was produced of him doing that. But we were in a room of about 500-600 down in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
which you've been to. And these Brazilians who were in this Messianic Jewish congregation, 500 or 600 of them, they just became quiet and began to weep. And when he was making that confession, it so touched them, because many of them are descendants of Jewish families who were persecuted by the Catholic Church in Spain or Portugal, and mostly Portugal, but and they've tried to reconnect with their Jewish roots and ancestry. So it was quite a huge breakthrough for not just for that congregation, but I think in general for anybody who watches that video and understands. So if you're gonna want to have unity, you don't ignore the entity that caused the most harm.
Mm-hmm.
You actually go to that entity on purpose, intentionally, and try to gain some kind of reconciliation.
Yeah.
Which is difficult for them and difficult for us who are Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult on both sides. So it had to be the Lord breaking our hearts to even enter into that sort of a thing.
Yeah. Well, I like how you mentioned that you just started with one person, and you built a relationship with someone who obviously was a priest. But even for anyone else out there, starting with someone who is a faithful member of the Catholic Church, building a relationship and asking the hard questions. I remember one time you and I were sitting in Miami at a board meeting for MJBI, and you were telling me this story, how you were on this long car ride with Father Peter, and you just peppered him with all of the questionable theology from where you sat, and his answers to you were clearly thoughtful, and though you differed on some of the conclusions, the relational component is what allowed you to have those honest conversations and open doors.
And Father Peter Hocken was a unique man. He had his two highest goals in life were to help the charismatic wing of the Catholic Church and the Messianic Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had, I mentioned earlier, he was a scholar. He had deeply studied the Messianic Jewish community, the Jewish community at large, and the history that went on between the Catholic Church and the Jewish community. So he was sensitive to the issues. Not every Catholic even knows that those issues exist or existed. And so in that way, he was unique. And I'm sharing that in case you have someone watching your podcast who says, "Oh, I'm going to go out and meet a Catholic person," and not every Catholic person even knows anything about the history of the Catholic Church and the Jewish community, and the Messianic Jewish community in particular.
Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah.
When you were quoting the numbers of the people that are estimated to be a part of the Catholic Church, I wonder if they still count me. Because
I'm sure they do.
I grew up Catholic and I was confirmed.
If you weren't excommunicated, then you're still
right. Yeah, exactly. Oh boy, I remember when you told me the story about being in Brazil,
right,
and being on that trip with Father Peter, and when that moment happened. So what happened right after that is you traveled to Argentina, and you ended up meeting with, at the time, a cardinal in Buenos Aires,
Right.
who was similarly open to the Messianic Jewish movement in
Right.
Buenos Aires, right?
Yes, Bergoglio.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that interaction.
Well, we spent significant time in Brazil and then flew over to Argentina to also hold some meetings and meet people on behalf of Towards Jerusalem Council too. And so we were there for probably a week or so. I'm not sure exactly how long, but our very last meeting before I was flying back to the USA was with a cardinal, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, who's oversees Argentina basically, and he wanted to meet us. Particularly, he wanted to meet a Messianic Jew. He already had an Argentinian friend who was one of the rabbis in Buenos Aires, who he had become close with, and so he wanted to hear my testimony. We met with him, and the interesting part about this is the timing. Because Pope Benedict, while we were in Brazil the day before we were getting ready to fly out to Argentina, the day or two before, Pope Benedict came out on television. I remember this explicitly because Father Peter and I were eating breakfast before we were headed over to a meeting. And we were watching, there was TV on in the hotel, in the breakfast area. And we were talking to each other, but then we weren't watching the TV. But when the TV started announcing something about Pope Benedict, it caught Father Peter's attention immediately. And what was it? Pope Benedict was standing up in public and resigning his papacy.
Yeah.
And Father Peter it was almost like his mouth dropped. He just could not believe it. I mean, the last pope that resigned was probably 800 years ago.
Wow.
So they almost always go until they die.
Yeah.
And just like recently in Pope Francis' case. But Pope Benedict resigned, and Bergoglio, Cardinal Bergoglio, who was a very humble guy, by the way, he said, "Don't call me cardinal or bishop." He said, "Just call me Father Bergoglio." And when he came in, he was just dressed like a priest, black with a white collar, black suit, and nothing fancy. And he said, "Just call me Father Bergoglio." And I said, "What's your first name?" "No, I'm just kidding." So he said, "Please tell me your story." And there were 6 of us in the room. I was the only Jewish guy, as I recall. And so I began to share my testimony, how I came to faith in Yeshua, which back then was still somewhat unusual. It's a little bit different today, but still. I began to share my testimony, and he listened very attentively. And when I was through with my testimony, part of my testimony, by the way, is that both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. And they have an amazing story of how they survived. And, and so when I got through sharing my testimony and he heard all this stuff about my surviving parents, he said, "Anyone who hates the Jewish people or hates Israel cannot be a true Christian."
Wow.
This is coming from a cardinal in the Catholic Church. And, I mean, talk about hearing something I never realized I would hear, from anyone in the Catholic Church. But now it's coming from one of the leaders in the Catholic Church. Well, as soon as we were done with our meeting, and, I was going right to the airport, and he was going straight off to Rome. But anyway, I'm fast tracking here, but let me just backtrack a second because it's such an interesting story. You've heard it many times, I think, but so once we were through sharing testimony and shared about the vision of TJC2, Toward Jerusalem Council 2, it's the Second Jerusalem Council, and once we got finished sharing all that, he blessed TJC2 for us to take it out into Argentina in particular and South America in general. and we were just about ready to go, you know.
Yeah.
I said, my heart started stirring. This is what happens to me when the Lord starts stirring my heart. And I said, Father Bergoglio, could we pray for you? Because we knew he was going off to the College of Cardinals to elect a new pope.
Right.
I said, could we pray for you? And he said yes, and immediately he lowered his head. We were all sitting down.
Yeah.
Immediately he lowered his head, and he started praying, you know, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, something's still stirring in my heart. And do you interrupt a cardinal who's already praying, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, I said, Father Bergoglio, could we lay hands on you and pray for you? He looked up, you know, he had his eyes closed. He looked up at me again. This time he had to think for a minute before he said yes. And he said, okay, yes. And then he stood up. It was very significant for him to have, you know, the hands, laying on of hands.
Right.
Very significant. He stood up. We all stood up and surrounded him in a circle. I laid my hands on top of his head. Can't remember if he was wearing a kippah or not, but I think he was. But anyways, I laid my hands on his head and started to pray. We were all praying, but I'm the only one who voiced a prayer. And I said, Lord, I pray for Father Bergoglio that in his consideration of the future pope, and I pray for all the cardinals, that they will love the apple of your eye, Israel. Well, I think I'm mixing it up a little bit, but first I said, may they love you with all of the heart, soul, and strength.
Yeah.
And may they love Israel, the apple of your eye, and support the Messianic Jewish community. And that, you know, I prayed some other things.
Sure.
But those three things were the basic parts of the prayer. And we were done. And afterwards, we were walking out to the elevator. You know, he was on the 6th floor or something. We walked out to the elevator, and I pushed the button to go down, and he stops me. And I turn around, and he puts his hands on my shoulders and looks me straight in the eyes, and he says, Rabbi Marty, please pray for me.
Wow.
And I got a tremendous burden to pray for him. We left, and I went back to the States. About a week later, or 2 weeks later, however long it took, I can't remember. I think it was maybe 2 weeks. My son Ari, who was who was on our staff at the time, he comes running into my office and he says, Dad, the white smoke, the white smoke.
Yeah.
I said, oh, awesome. We'll see how the Lord answered our prayers.
Yeah.
And then about 15 minutes later, one of our elders comes in who was on staff, Dave Piles. And Dave came in and said, it's Father Bergoglio, it's Father Bergoglio.
Wow.
And I went, wow, just like just your reaction. I went, wow, the Lord really did answer our prayers.
Wow.
And
so this was Pope Francis.
This is Pope Francis, yeah. So, of course, he turned out to be a controversial pope because he's so, I think, politically and socially extremely left or progressive. But in a way, it was kind of understandable because, you know, he grew up in Argentina, which was a little bit like that.
Yeah. And,
you know, he cared for the poor. That's what he did. I mean, this is the guy who, you know, he was the archbishop, and one of the Catholics in Buenos Aires gave him a mansion, like semi-palace.
Oh, wow.
Right on the river in Buenos Aires. And he immediately sold it and gave the money to the poor.
Wow.
He never stepped foot in it.
Yeah.
Didn't live in it. And I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. He was constantly walking around the streets of Buenos Aires and helping the poor and all that sort of thing, even as a cardinal. So, you know, that was his heart. he made some very controversial statements that got him in trouble and even caused us some heartburn
Yeah.
in our relationship with him. But overall, I really believe to this day that he knew the Lord and that he actually really loved the Lord and wanted to serve him deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's just a man like everybody else, and did the best as he could.
Yeah. So during his time as the Pope, I know from being, walking more closely with you over the last decade or so, especially in ministry, that him being in that role opened a lot of doors for the advancing of a lot of dialogue and a lot of key decisions. And you've been involved in quite a few of those.
Yes.
So where do you see the state of things now? There's a new Pope in the Catholic Church. And what's your outlook on the continued cooperation between the Messianic Jewish movement and the Catholic Church towards unity?
Well, I think that is yet to be revealed.
Yeah.
However, I think Pope Leo, the new Pope, this is a very interesting fact about him. He already had a relationship, somewhat of a relationship, favorable relationship with the Jewish community at large.
Oh.
And so it was the president of one of the large Jewish organizations in the U.S. I can't remember which one it was, but called him up and congratulated him, and he received that with joy. And in his studies, he actually went, I think it was to Spertus College, which is a Jewish college. I mean, it's up in Chicago, and that's where he grew up. And he lived for 10 or more years in Peru, but he was a Chicago guy.
Yeah.
And so I think he's favorable toward the Jewish community, and time will tell if he's favorable toward Israel or not. I don't know. And he also doesn't have much of a history at all with the Messianic Jewish community. So we're praying and hoping that the Lord will open a door for us in the Messianic community to meet with him and introduce the Messianic community as we have in the past with the past two popes.
I think we're recording this in the middle part of May, but Dr. David Rudolph, I believe, is in Rome right now.
He is.
Yeah.
That's right.
And continuing the dialogue, right?
That's right,
So I know that one of the really exciting and unique things that's happened with this dialogue, the Messianic Jewish Roman Catholic Church dialogue, that is to large credit Father Peter and the work of TJC2 being a part of this, and Mark Kinzer and many, many others. But where now you have people who are faithful Catholic members who have a Jewish background, their parents were Jewish, their grandparents were Jewish, they're believers, obviously, in Yeshua, members of the Roman Catholic Church, but they're wanting to basically even have Hebrew liturgy, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe
right.
give us a lay of the land on where things are at now and where you see them going as far as setting aside all of our theology here. If you're a Jewish person who's come to faith in the Catholic Church and you're a practicing Roman Catholic, you're a Jewish disciple of Jesus or Yeshua in the Catholic Church, give us a lay of the land of some of the advancements that have been happening there.
Well, the Catholic Church, as I mentioned, were antagonists in terms of Jewish life and Jewish practice. And for centuries, many centuries, the Catholic Church did not allow any Jewish practice, even if you were Jewish and you became a believer and joined the Catholic Church.
Right.
Yeah. They didn't just shun Jewish practice, it was criminal in the Catholic Church to practice anything Jewish as a Catholic, as a Jewish believer. But after Vatican II, that changed. So, Pope John, I think the 23rd, who called the council, the Vatican Council, which lasted about 4 or 5 years.
This is the 1960s, correct?
1962 to 1965, let's say. He died in the middle of it, and Pope Paul, I think the 8th, maybe, took it over and continued the council to the end. But they created one document in particular, which is called Nostra Aetate. And it's funny because Nostra Aetate is the document that says, okay, it's all right for the Catholic Church to connect with people who are not Christians.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, so that included the Messianic Jews
Mm-hmm.
and the Jewish community, of course. And so it was still a struggle because most Protestants that I know think the Catholic Church is monolithic. Whatever the Pope says, everybody does it.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
Yep.
It's just not true. And so it was a struggle for that document, Nostra Aetate, and still is, to trickle down from the Vatican and from Vatican Council II down into everyday Catholic
Right.
churches, and in South America and other places. I'm thinking it probably has never even trickled that far.
Yeah.
So that was a turning point for the Catholic Church. And in fact, under Pope Benedict, we met with Pope Benedict. I'll share with you the origins of the Jewish, Messianic Jewish and Catholic, Roman Catholic dialogue, which didn't exist before.
Yeah.
So we got a call. We had a prayer journey. TJC2 group had a prayer journey in Rome. And so while we were there on this prayer journey, we got a call from the Vatican and inviting us. The Pope asked us to come to the Vatican because he wanted to meet us, especially the Jewish members.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. This is another funny story with Father Peter. There were about six or eight of us who were walking together to the Vatican. Father Peter and I were walking together, in 2 by 2. And Father Peter was a unique man. He was probably in his 70s at the time, or late 60s, early 70s. And but he had this kind of baby face.
Yeah.
And he was walking into the Vatican with like sparkles in his eyes. It was like taking a kid to a candy store or an ice cream store. It was like, wow, I'm actually going into the Vatican to meet the Pope. And that's never happened to him before.
Yeah. Wow.
So he was sharing this with me, and I said, Father Peter, stick with the Jews. You're going places.
I've used that quote a lot, by the way.
Oh.
Yes.
So anyway, we get in there, and at the time, Pope John Paul was very sick. It was his last year of his papacy. He was very sick. He was in and out of deep sickness. Well, something just came on him, and he couldn't come down.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sent Cardinal
Ratzinger, yeah.
Who later became the Pope, right?
Benedict, right.
Yeah,
yep.
Benedict, a year later. So we were there, and I was sitting next to Benedict, like you and I are sitting here together. I mean, we were at a boardroom table. And I said, he looked at me and he said, please share your story. So I shared my story with him again, like I did later on with Francis. But at the end and there were about 3 or 4 of us who were Messianic Jews on this side of the table. And so the 4 of us shared our testimonies and about how we came to Yeshua. And here's another man. So most lay Catholics and probably almost all Protestants are not aware that Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict, was an extreme scholar.
Yeah.
He was a theologian and a scholar, big time. So in his studies, he knew something about Messianic Jews, but never met any.
Okay.
And so here we are. He's now hearing 4 Jewish men share a testimony how we came to Yeshua. And he said 2 things. He said, 1, this can only mean one thing. Jesus is coming soon.
Wow.
That was his response to Jewish testimony of faith in Yeshua.
Wow.
This can only mean one thing. And he knew his Bible. I mean, and what he said was exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
We don't say that so much as Messianic Jews because we don't want people to think that we're just being flippant or
Yeah.
egotistical or
Right.
egocentric. But for a Catholic, one of the top, he was the right-hand man for Pope John Paul. And Pope John Paul sent him to meet with us. And so that was one thing he said. This can only mean one thing, that Jesus is coming soon. And the next thing he said is, this must also mean that God had something planned for the free church. These are the people outside the Christians outside the Catholic Church. They didn't even call them Christians.
Right.
You know, they're called the free church. And so, because they were separated from the Catholic Church. So it was quite extraordinary to hear these things from one of the top guys in the Catholic Church.
Wow.
And it affected all of us. And he had instructions from Pope John Paul. Afterwards, when we were through, all of us were through talking, and we had Father Peter with us on the other side of the table, and Johannes Fichtenbauer and Brian Cox, who were, two Catholics and an Anglican. And so he turns to, I think it was to Johannes Fichtenbauer, who was at that point the right-hand man of Cardinal Schönborn, who's the Archbishop of Vienna, Austria, who, by the way, was on the short list to become the next pope.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Quite influential. In fact, Cardinal Schönborn was the lead editor of the New Vatican Catechism.
Oh, wow.
Now, this came out probably 30 years ago now, but it's new compared to, centuries of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And so in the New Catholic Catechism, and here, this is a Jewish guy talking to you, about the Catholic Church. But the New Catholic Catechism had amazing changes that reflected Vatican II, and one of them was a complete switch of the interpretation of Romans 11, which said that the Jewish people are the chosen people.
Yeah.
And anti-Semitism is wrong, et cetera.
Wow.
I mean, this is the Catholic Catechism. Now, you think, because all the Catholic boys like you go through catechism,
right?
And but not many of them ever read that.
Yeah, I don't think I read that part. Unfortunately,
that book is very thick, And so, anyway, there are numerous places in it that are now changed and reflect a positive attitude towards Israel, not the current political Israel, but Israel as a nation that God created, and the chosen people, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, so that that was kind of an amazing connection, and the Pope, via Father Pope, who became Pope Benedict, Ratzinger, he turned to Johannes Fichtenbauer, who was the right-hand man of Cardinal Schönborn, and said, I am appointing, the Pope is appointing, but he was speaking in the Pope's name. We are appointing Cardinal Schönborn as the official Vatican liaison to the Messianic Jewish community.
Wow.
This is the first time that I know of in history that there's any official appointment from the Vatican as a liaison or any connection like this to the Messianic Jewish community. At that point, there was another cardinal in the room, or we were sent down to his. Yeah, there was another cardinal that met us there, and we went down with him after the meeting was over with Ratzinger. We went down to this other guy's room, who was the Pope's theologian. And we sat with him, an elderly guy. We sat with him in his room. Believe it or not, we began to sing some hymns, even teach him some Messianic Jewish songs. And he loved it. He was also a cardinal.
Yeah.
He loved it. And at that moment, the dialogue was birthed.
Wow.
With this cardinal.
Yeah.
He and Father Peter Hocken and Johannes Fichtenbauer made a decision to birth the Jewish, Messianic Jewish Catholic dialogue, which is going on till today.
Yeah.
So the future of it is unknown. if the Pope doesn't change, the current new Pope doesn't change anything, the discussion will continue.
Yeah.
The dialogue will continue.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an amazing thing that most Catholics don't even know exists.
Yeah, that's so true. I don't think evangelicals know that exists. So there's the two things that Benedict, Pope Benedict, before he was Pope Benedict, said to you that were so interesting that, one, Jesus is coming soon,
Yeah.
and then two, this must mean also that God is at work in the church outside of the Catholic Church, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is coincidental that his eyes were open to that through the testimony of followers of Yeshua who are Jewish. And I think when we started the whole podcast here, that was, I don't know if I said this before we hit record or not, but I feel like this is the Messianic Jewish movement is truly the bridge between all of these disparate streams in the Catholic Church. And I think Father Peter wrote his book on this to some degree, The Glory and the Shame,
yes,
which is that if the shame of the church it's turning its back on the Jewish people, the glory of the church will be the acceptance of its Jewish brothers and sisters who are believers into the fellowship. So, Marty, in October, they'll be Towards Jerusalem Council 2 will have its big summit in Jerusalem, God willing.
God willing, yeah.
And so please pray for that, by the way. It's a big deal. The last one was canceled because of the Hamas attacks of October 7th in 2023. So this is really going to be a big step forward because it's pulling in members from the body of Yeshua all over the world.
Yes.
Also from the Catholic Church to have a large summit and dialogue together, because you've been having the Messianic Jewish Roman Catholic dialogue one-on-one essentially, right? But this is going to be, there'll be a wider dialogue here.
Well, one of the very high-level Catholics, who's also a cardinal, has already accepted our invitation, to the summit. I'm glad you said, God willing, that it will happen, because Israel is still at war.
Yeah.
And more airlines are flying in. But if anything critical happens that would close the airport, we would have to cancel the summit again, like we did in 2023.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't happen. I hope we can continue on with it, but there's always that caveat.
Yeah. Well, there's, as we end, there is real warfare over this. I think what Rabbi Marty said about the Pope's own admission that this must mean that Jesus is coming soon. And as you could imagine, even those of us in the evangelical tradition, there are different biblical impulses that we see that we try to understand in part that would trigger Yeshua, Jesus's return to earth to establish his kingdom on earth. And it's interesting that what opened that up in the Pope's mind was the Messianic Jewish movement being revived and being a witness to the church, both the Catholic Church and the non-Catholic Church. So I'm saying all that to say, please do pray. Pray for TJC2. This is a movement that is under intense spiritual warfare because, as we can imagine, I think we talked about this on this podcast, anything that God loves or chooses, the enemy hates. And obviously, the enemy will do anything to delay the return of Yeshua, because then the rule of his reign on earth continues to sow chaos and discord on earth. And so please pray for TJC2, pray for Rabbi Marty, and pray for this Roman Catholic Messianic Jewish dialogue, which really is critical to unity in the body. And if you're someone from our stream, the evangelical stream, who has a difficult time with the Catholic Church and its history, I hope that today's episode has encouraged you that if anyone has had a difficult time with the Catholic Church's history, it's the Jewish community. And really encourage you to think about the testimony from Rabbi Marty, that it was a relationship with one person that began something that led to meetings with the Pope, that led to Rabbi Marty praying for and laying his hands on a future Pope. And it's just one moment at a time where we're learning how to relate to one another in unity. And finally, I just want to end on the website for TJC2 is TJC2. II.org.
Roman numeral 2, yeah.
Yeah, Roman numeral 2.
Yeah. TJCII.org.
We'll put it in the description. So go there, look at the resources. The vision of it really is uniting the body for Yeshua's return, Jew and Gentile. So, Marty, thank you. It was fun to relive that. Even I've heard you tell that story so many times, but every time I do, I'm wowed by how the Lord has used you. And
it's amazing how the Lord, by the way, I just want to emphasize, yes, the devil tries his hardest to foil the plan of God, but God is sovereign.
Amen.
I mean, God is not going to be delayed by the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to encourage everybody, don't start fearing the enemy.
Yeah.
Just fear the Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Stick with the Jews. They're going places. Right from Rabbi Marty's lips. And that's my ending encouragement to you all. God bless you each. Thank you for spending this time with us. See you next time.